Here's one area where a bolt snapped off. It's usually the small ones that give you trouble. These don't have as much meat as the larger suspension bolts. So I had to re-thread this into the aluminum arm. Another issue I had was this sway bar end link. It previously had the older style. You had to put a hex into the end to keep it from spinning. Well, that had to be cut out because it was so rusted. It wouldn't even budge. This newer one I replaced it with works a lot nicer. You can actually stuff a wrench in between there to keep it in place, whereas the old one didn't have that feature. This is the older style of the end link that I was talking about. There's the end where you would stuff an Allen key to keep it from spinning. And there's no way to keep it still in the middle. So this would have to be cut out or torched. When I was doing the rear diff restack, these drive shaft bolts are really hard to get out due to the corrosion. Many times when I took the car in for alignment, the tech was mentioned that they can't get zero toe because the tie rod ends would not spin far enough. So when I replaced the white line kit, I had to re-thread the tie rod and just clean up some of the rust there. This lower control arm bolt is known to seize even when there's not that much rust on the car. The bolt gets stuck to a bushing sleeve and it breaks off the retaining nut, which is inside the subframe on the Evo 8 and 9. The only way to get it out is to cut off the lower control arm. So when I did the roll center kit, I just used a ball joint remover, taking off all the parts here and just pushing it off with the arm still in the car. Suspension has also been affected by rust. I have coilovers now, but the previous KYB and Bilsteins were rusted really badly. The Bilsteins were so bad that the spring mount rusted apart, and that's what led me to get the coilovers. But that doesn't solve everything. You still got to make sure that you grease the threads, and they even have covers for the spring so that these don't rust out as well. Here's a fender bolt that didn't come out. These 3 bolts are notoriously known to snap off because it corrodes underneath. I replaced it with stainless steel hardware, but still haven't had time to remove this out. I've snapped a few of these headlight bolts as well. Again, it's usually the small bolts that give you trouble. You'll turn it out a few times, you think they're coming out, then there's not a lot of resistance, and then all of a sudden the head just snaps off. Then you got to use an extractor or drill it out. During the final autocross last year, I noticed that the dipstick was flopping around, and it turns out this retaining bracket snapped due to the rust. So I had to replace that. When these rusted out, they didn't even turn. As soon as you put a socket to it, it just snapped right off. So these were replaced. This is the rear license plate, the bracket. One of my cars so rusted that when I tried to replace this parking light, it just disintegrated. So far, I have to say I've been pretty lucky. Most of the inconveniences with the rust have been minor. Again, that's mostly because the larger bolts have more meat on them. They're not just going to break off. It's really the tiny ones that will give people nightmares. So I definitely use anti-seize. And, periodically just check everything to make sure that the rust hasn't come back.